All right, so it looks like we just got a few more people on here, so I think Carol and I can get started. I will introduce myself first. So my name's Francesca Federico, and I am a co-founder and president at 12 Points Retirement Advisors. And we're a 401k fiduciary advisory firm located here in Boston, Massachusetts, and in Concord. And I didn't have your regular start in this industry, so if you were to picture me as somebody else, I'm kind of like Marisa Tomei and my cousin Vinny. My family is an Italian immigrant entrepreneurial family that owns a myriad of blue collar businesses here in Boston. And I cut my teeth working on my family's retirement plans as a young girl and loved it, and was the only child in my family to not go into our family's business. And nowadays I just spent all my time in 401ks. And what I realized at a young age was that a lot of plans don't get the attention or have the advisor, the correct advisor on their plan. So a lot of what I like to do is look at plans costs, look at the service that people are getting, which is kind of doing an RFP. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about today. And I'll let Carol introduce herself as well.
Thank you, Francesca. I have actually been working in the employee plan and ERISA space since the early days of ERISA. Back when we didn't have subspecialties, but you had to know how to handle any kind of benefit question. I co-founded Cohen & Buckman with my partner after spending many years handling these issues at major law firms. We're a boutique firm. We only do what we know best, but we handle pretty much anything having to do with employee benefit plans. And I have made as one of my specialties advising fiduciaries about how they can best protect themselves, which is how we really can introduce this topic of RFPs and how important they are.
Excellent. And Carol and I met each other in a network group, and it's interesting to find two female founders of firms who really just spend most of their time in this space. So when we were talking, we thought, what a good program to put on for a lot of people who maybe aren't doing RFPs. And we'll give you some examples of what we're finding, but let's talk more about what is an RFP and what are the steps you need to take to put an RFP in place. So let's talk about number one here.
Okay. Francesca, I'd just like to give a very brief explanation of why you need to do RFPs before we just jump onto slide one. Because you have to sort of have been an ostrich with your head in the sand not to understand that employee benefits fiduciary breach litigation has exploded. In 2020, according to Bloomberg, it was many times what it was in 2019. And some of these suits have resulted in settlements of $50 million and higher. ERISA doesn't require you to do an RFP, though the Department of Labor recommends that you do them every 3 to 5 years. But it really is your best protection, your proof that you have gotten the best service providers for the most reasonable fees. If you are sued for fiduciary breach, you have a record that you went through this prudent process that you can produce in court. Many people who don't do regular RFPs may do benchmarking, which is good, but it's not as precise as the RFPs, because you may be comparing apples to oranges. You have to have a good peer group, the right peer group. And just looking at people in your industry or people whose plan assets are the same size range as yours may not give you as precise a comparison as the RFP. You don't need to change providers just because you're doing an RFP. It's your way to find out whether you have the best deal and whether you perhaps can get a better deal from your current providers if you're happy with them. But people are sometimes afraid. They don't have the time to devote to them, or they think they don't know how to do it. So an important takeaway from this program is that it's not so daunting if you get organized, and I'm about to explain exactly what steps you should plan to follow. But there are also professionals like Francesca who can come in and help you through the process and sort of quarterback what you're doing, and that would make the burden a lot easier. So they're really not as daunting as you may think.
That's a good intro, Carol.
Back to
And
your question, Francesca, like what are these RFPs and what steps should we take? It's really your way to find out what services and fees you can get in the market for your plan. And in order to do that, you need to provide information about your plan to candidates. You need to ask questions to get the information that you need to make an informed decision. And you need to be able to evaluate the candidates so that you have a basis for making the right decision, and you need to document it. So the slide that we had before shows the steps that I'm going to go through. But I think it, in simplest terms, the RFP boils down to the 6 steps that are on this slide. Identify good candidates, develop your proposal request, set a schedule, review the responses, that's going to be critical, make your choice, and then if you're changing providers, you need to coordinate with your current providers so that the transition is seamless and doesn't create problems for you or your participants. So that's really the overview of what we're going to talk about. This is a big picture presentation. We're going to talk about the forest, not the trees. But the things that are most important for you to organize this and reach a good result at the end of the RFP.
yes, I will add one thing too. 3 words that I use all the time are things have changed, and they really have, especially in the retirement plan space. And the whole reason you put a retirement plan in place is it's probably to help your employees save for retirement. Maybe you're looking to put away some money. Maybe you're not looking to pay any extra in taxes. But what people forget about these plans is it's not the company's money. You are a steward for this. You're a steward of this money for your employees and your participants. So that's a big burden. And you just need to make sure that the plan that's in place in going through this RFP is the costs are reasonable, because these expenses could really eat away at the participants' accounts. You're getting the best service for your plan. And in going through an RFP, those are some things that can stand out or jump out at you. I can tell you, over the last year or 2 years, the fees and the services have come down, service and technology have gone up, and they're doing an RFP will highlight all of this with your current plan. So I just wanted to add that before we get into this first slide here. So I'll turn it back over to Carol.
Okay. The starting point is going to be identifying the candidates who are going to get the request for proposal. And sometimes people are confused about where to start. If you have experts, if you're dealing with people like me or Francesca, we can suggest people who other clients are happy with and who may be suitable for your kind of plan. But it's important to look at this in a professional way. And one mistake that I sometimes see, particularly when I'm dealing with plans in the smaller or mid-size range, is people may hire their brother-in-law, their friend, a member of their club who happened to mention that she was in the retirement plan business, or worked for a record keeper. That is really not the best practice in terms of looking for candidates. You can certainly include those people, but you have to make sure that you subject them to the same standards that you do others who are included in the search. So if you wouldn't hire them if they weren't a friend or a relative, then you really should not be picking them as a service provider. And that's very important because it's an exposure if you're ever questioned in court about how you went about this decision. So you want to do this in the most objective way possible. And it's in your interest to have as many candidates as you can manage to evaluate. You can also ask your peers within your industry or business group whether they are providers they're happy with. You can look for people on the internet. You can do searches to find people who seem to be offering the services that you want. I think it's a good idea to expand your search and not just look at 2 or 3 people, but try to get insight into a bigger slice of the market and what it will provide for you. Now, that's a judgment call because you don't want too many people or so many people that you make it unmanageable. But I think you want to get more than 2 or 3 people, and you want to really seriously consider all the responses. Another common situation that I come across is people may contact me when they're doing an RFP, but you sort of really know they've already got somebody they want to hire, but maybe their corporation says they have to do an RFP before they can hire the person. But you really shouldn't go in with any preconceived idea about where you want to come out. But you really need to evaluate people with an open mind. Okay, let's go to the next one.
Thanks, Carol. And I'd also add in, there can be a few different kinds of RFPs. So we've been throwing around this term record keeper. That's going to be the provider where your plan is. So for example, a Vanguard or an Empower. And then you might have an advisor on the firm, like a 12 points, and you could have an RFP for your advisor. So there's a few different RFPs you can have in candidates as well.
The next step, developing your proposal request, is really important because you need to get enough information to make an informed decision back from people. This is your chance to get information that isn't on their website, and that's specifically relevant to your needs and to showing that you fulfilled your fiduciary responsibilities in hiring the appropriate provider. And if you are, particularly if you are looking for an investment advisor, an investment manager who is an ERISA fiduciary, and you should be looking for an ERISA fiduciary. One of your questions should be, will you be an ERISA fiduciary? Will you stand behind the services you provide and the advice that you give if you're giving advice? Because that is the highest standard that can be applied to your service provider. If you are hiring a record keeper in the typical situation, they won't be a fiduciary. That's sort of standard in the industry, though you can hire record keepers who will be fiduciary administrators under special agreements. But particularly if you're looking for investment advice, you want to know the number of ERISA clients that provider has. You want to know their size. You want to know ERISA assets under management, because ERISA has special rules. It's a special area of the market. And particularly in the conflict area and the rules about dealing with related parties, we have rules that don't apply in other areas of investment. So you want somebody who not only has a lot of assets under management, but who deals with ERISA assets the way Francesca does on a regular basis. There's really no substitute for that ERISA experience and familiarity with the rules. You want to know about the rate of turnover of the ERISA clients, because high turnover can indicate that a lot of people aren't satisfied with the services that they're getting. And you want to know about extra services the candidate can provide. For example, investment education to participants. Nowadays, financial wellness is a big topic and a big problem because a lot of people need more education to manage their finances and not just their pensions. So those are really some of the basics. There are a lot more details that need to go into the request, and I don't want to take too much time up with this slide, but you will want to know if your provider has insurance that will cover the services it's providing. You want to know if you're hiring a fiduciary, if they have fiduciary liability insurance. You want to know if they have cybersecurity insurance. That's a really big issue nowadays.
Yes.
Because your insurance policies probably won't cover a third-party provider. And there could be huge liabilities if there is a mistake or some kind of problem that shows gross negligence on the provider's side. And cybersecurity is a really hot issue right now with the Department of Labor. They just issued a 3-part set of guidance on best practices for cybersecurity. One of those involves questions that you should ask if you're hiring a service provider and you're the hiring fiduciary. And I highly recommend that you look at that if you are engaging in an RFP, or even if you've decided to review the cybersecurity arrangements of your current providers, because it's really important.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Set a schedule. It's really important. Now, you may have a schedule that's being imposed on you if you're not happy with your current provider, or if there's a contract coming up for renewal and you think you might want to renegotiate it, that will require you to set deadlines for the interim steps here. My experience is that if you don't do this, it's going to end up being open-ended. And it's going to end up taking a lot more time than you think, not just because it's open-ended, but because there's a lot of time just deciding, well, when should we make the decision? Do we have enough information to make the decision? I was personally involved with one of these on the hiring fiduciary side at my prior law firm. And one of the first things we learned was that if we didn't set schedules and regularly meet to discuss where we were and where we were going, we just weren't moving forward. That's just some advice from my personal experience as well. Let's go to the next one. Reviewing the responses is also really important. I think that you will want to see, as part of the review, the standard contract that the provider is going to ask you to sign. And it's important to get that before you've actually made your decision and started going ahead with a choice. And that's one of the other things that I see in my practice. Sometimes people go through the whole process, and after they've decided who they want to hire, they send me the contract. And it may be fine, but it may be terrible. It may be that they want to provide investment advice and they don't want to be a fiduciary, which to me would mean you should be looking for somebody else if they want to change that. It may have one-sided provisions. For example, it may provide indemnification for them and not to you if they make a mistake. Many contracts still don't have cybersecurity provisions, even though it's become such a hot topic in the area. So it's really important to have your attorney, your ERISA counsel, look at that contract as part of the review and not after the decision has been made. You really have bargaining power if you want to change a provision and you haven't made your choice yet, and you really sacrifice that as well. If you only send around the contract after the person, sometimes I even see the person's up and running and providing services, and I get a contract that really is not what I would have recommended. And it's a difficult situation for all of us to work through.
It is. And I'd also say that in this part of the process is when you really get to see the differences and the nuances with all the providers. You're going to get a lot of different answers to the questions that you provided in the RFP. And I love the last part of this slide. It doesn't require that you select the provider with the lowest fee. All the DOL cares about and fiduciary committee cares about is that you have a process in how you selected the provider. Maybe technology is important to you, or integration, or location. So all of those things can come into your consideration. You don't have to pick the provider with the lowest fee.
That's absolutely true, Francesca. And it's very important that you actually have a provider who's going to provide you good service. And it's perfectly okay to pay more for appropriate service, particularly if you have a complicated plan. That's a common misconception based on all of this litigation, that you need to seek out the lowest provider, but that's not always true. Just one other comment related to the prior slide. You're going to want to talk to people and not just review their written proposal. Talking to them can give you a real understanding of how they conduct themselves. And there's a lot, you need to have a comfort level with the person, and they need to be a good fit for your organization. And the way you find out how you handle things to actually talk to them. When we did our own firm search, we asked for references, and we actually also talked to some clients whose name they gave us about their experiences, and that was also helpful. But you want to find out more about the candidate than you can tell from the written responses and information you have. We also asked at the end to talk to the person who's going to be our account contact, because we wanted to make sure that we were comfortable with that person, and that person was comfortable with our governance structure and understood what we needed. And that was really helpful in making a good decision at the end.
That's right. And every business is different. So, in my family's business, our employees are living paycheck to paycheck. So if you have a fancy advisor coming in with a suit on, sitting in an automotive shop or in the back of a restaurant, probably not going to jive. But there's also different other 401k plans, like law firms. You need an advisor that knows how lawyers act and operate, and making sure that that plan is specific to them. So hiring an advisor and a service provider that gets your business model and is going to connect with your employees is really important as well.
The next step, making your choice, is something that also you want to document, because the written record is going to be your best defense if what you did is ever challenged or looked at. The DOL may look at this as part of a routine plan audit as well. It will ask if you're doing RFPs. It will ask if you have an investment policy statement. It will ask for a lot of things that aren't required by any specific regulation or provision of ERISA that I can point to. But that the DOL knows indicates that you're taking your fiduciary responsibilities seriously and doing things well. I already talked about the advisability of talking to current clients. I do think you want to request to talk to the people who will be responsible for your account. Some providers actually said to us, we have like 3 or 4 people that you can talk to, and you can select the one that you feel most comfortable with. And I think that's ideal.
Yep. I'd also say too, if you were looking to change record keepers, so if your plan was at, let's just use ADP, and you were looking to move to Vanguard, there is a process associated with that. And it involves it could be anywhere from a 10 to 12-week process. So I've had plans before that said, I don't have a lot of time, and I need to make sure that this transition person is going to be the best fit for us. So asking to talk to those people is going to really set you up for success in moving a plan. We're in a lot of RFPs for a lot of different companies. And sometimes, people don't know to ask for references. So I always offer them. I think the best, decision you can make in making a choice is talking to these providers' clients. and really getting a good sense of, they talk a big game, but do they deliver? What are they like on a day-to-day basis? What's their service level? And, if you're a law firm, you could talk to another law firm. If you're an auto body shop, I'm sure that provider probably works with another auto body shop. So really, I think getting references is a big part of making, a good final decision.
My suggestion is that you meet to make the final decision, and that if you have issues that arose from the contract that you looked at, that you should tell the candidate you want to select, you're at the top of our list, we'd like to hire you, but we have these issues that we and our counsel saw in your contract, and it's subject to our working out an acceptable agreement. I think that puts you in the best position.
It does, definitely.
Coordinating with other providers is really important, and Francesca mentioned this a bit before. If you have a current provider and you are replacing that provider, you need to make sure, first of all, that there's no gap in the services that are provided. Second of all, that the new provider has all of the records and information it needs to just get up and running on day one. You will need to communicate with people, including your participants. You may need to send a blackout notice if you are dealing with a record keeper change, because if you have a situation where people can't take loans or distributions or change their elections for more than 3 business days, you need to send a notice at least 30 days in advance to the participants. Most service agreements have some kind of provision about transition services. If the contract ends, your provider may charge an additional fee to work on the transition, but you need to do whatever needs to be done to make sure that this is a seamless transition from the point of view of your participants, and that everyone who needs to be notified, your trustee, anyone else who has an arrangement with the plan for service, knows about the new contacts and the new arrangements that have been set in place.
Yep. And I think that it's really important having an advisor that's quarterbacking all of this for you, because let's face it, the 401k is probably a pimple on what you're doing on a daily basis. So making sure that you've got experts handling this for you. So Carol, we actually do have a question here. Under new DOL guidance, what questions should sponsors and advisors be asking about cybersecurity protocols regarding service providers?
Okay, as I said, one of the 3 best practices releases that the DOL issued recently has a long list of cybersecurity concerns. I think that some of the things you want to ask that are most important: have they had breaches? If they have, how have they handled them? Do they have a breach policy, a procedure that they want to use? How do they encrypt data? Do they have audits of their system to make sure that it's secure? There are a long list of questions. Sometimes my clients actually ask to be able to audit, have access to that audit that was done for the service provider. What kind of security are they going to use for the participant website? We've had some lawsuits recently in which imposters were able to steal plan accounts because of inadequate security. They need to be able to train their employees properly. In one of those lawsuits, the telephone representative actually helped the imposter set up a new password, and just due to improper training, I guess, assisted in the breach. So those are some big issues, but there is a very helpful list of things that you should be looking at in that DOL guidance.
Mm-hmm. So we did go through the 6 steps. We do have a couple other questions here. So Carol, I'm going to fire the first one off. So our 401k advisor was recently acquired by a large firm. What does this have to do with an RFP?
Okay, great question. And this is an issue that's coming up in the record keeper area too, where there's been a consolidation of record keepers, and we have people who are being bought by larger companies. And what happens is, whether it's an advisor change or a new owner of your record keeper, is you suddenly get a notice. And it may sound innocuous. We're not going to change our procedures. The same people will be in charge of your account. But these are people you haven't vetted. You haven't selected them. You may not know anything about them. And suddenly they're running your plan or proposing to do so. And depending on the time, notice varies in these situations. But if you have enough time, you may well want to do an RFP to protect yourself. Mm-hmm. And to make sure that those are the right people to be in charge of your services and your plan. Yes. They may have a specialty or a niche in a different area of the market than yours. They may not have the particular services that you want. In my experience, when we changed, because this happened to my firm, but also talking to clients, is that they may start off saying nothing's going to change, and then all of a sudden your account rep is replaced going down the line and different changes occur. I think that it is advisable, though it's not required by any provision, if you are not familiar with this new provider in particular, what are its cybersecurity practices? Does it have proper insurance? Has it been involved with breaches? There are a whole host of questions that came up when you hired the original provider, and the answers may not be the same when you ask them of the acquiring company. The systems may be different. I think it's highly advisable to consider an RFP in that situation.
Yep. And there's, I think right now, just due to the activity in the market, there are these large insurance companies are really acquiring a lot of these smaller independent advisory shops. On the record keeper side, we just saw Mass Mutual Empower acquire Mass Mutual. So, really staying in tune with your plan and making sure that you do have the right people in place. And, it takes a week to go by when you realize, wait a second, I was just working with this one person and now they've been acquired by another firm. So, that would require an RFP or even just an RFI. But that's a good question. So Carol, here's another one. For the newer option this year of pooled employer plans with professional management and investments, do these RFP recommendations apply as well?
The simple answer to that, I think, is yes. These are our new arrangements that will relieve adopting employers of a lot of fiduciary responsibility. They still have a responsibility to prudently select and hire the provider. It's a little more complicated. We don't have time to go into any details about special considerations, but you're hiring actually a package of providers when you adopt a pooled employer plan, and you need to look at all of them and how they're going to fit together. So it's actually a more complex evaluation than the one that we've discussed. But again, there are professionals out there who can help you and guide you and quarterback the search for you.
Yep. So someone just asked, who should be spearheading these RFPs? They seem like they require some time and some expertise.
If your plan has a committee, your committee will usually be in charge of the RFP, but you can delegate work to a quarterback who will really take the brunt of the work off your shoulders. Usually it's a committee. If your plan doesn't have a committee, somebody on the company's side will want to be in charge of the arrangement, and it should be somebody who has familiarity with plans.
Yep.
Some companies would have an executive, sometimes the HR department will be spearheading this in consultation with their advisors, or, share the quarterbacking with an advisor.
Mm-hmm. So we're involved in RFPs when they're looking for another advisory shop. So it would be us against another advisor. When it comes to the record keeper, we do that for all of our clients. So having a proactive quarterback type 401k fiduciary advisor on the plan can really take that lift on for you and then present to you. So good question. We have one more here, Carol. So how often should you do an RFP versus benchmarking the plan?
As I mentioned in that brief introduction, the Department of Labor thinks you should be doing them every 3 to 5 years. I think that's a good schedule, although I do come across in my practice sometimes people who haven't done one in 15 years. Some people have never done one, but the DOL says 3 to 5 years, and I think that's a good range. You can do benchmarking as well. In fact, I think a best practice might be to do benchmarking in years in which you're not doing an RFP.
Yep. And on our side of things, we do full RFPs. Like she said, about 3 years. We benchmark every year. I call it an RFI, a request for information. But you also have to remember, if you acquired another company, or if there's been a significant change in your plan, maybe you started out with 10 employees and now you have 100. There's certain events that would trigger an RFP, and just again, having a proactive advisor who's monitoring these things for you. So I think that if you did have a significant event and your plan might have gone from 15 employees and $1 million to $5 million and 60 employees, you definitely have to RFP that because it's significantly changed. So does not look like we have any more questions. It's about 12:40. So Carol, thank you so much for joining us today. Your expertise is invaluable. And I'll turn it over to you if you have any last closing thoughts.
Just that this was really just the big picture, and it's very important to work out all of the details as far in advance as you can to make it as painless as possible and as protective as possible. Yep. Because fiduciaries want to be able to show that they've done a good job.
That's right. Well, thank you all so much, Carol. Thank you. And feel free to reach out to either of us if you have any questions. We did record this, so we'll be sending it out as well. Have a great afternoon.